for today's video, what I want to talk about is actual use of containers, and what is a container, and why would you think about using that over something like a virtual machine, and kind of how to implement Docker with containers. And I'm going to use the actual Python Twitter app that I made. I'm going to show you how I'm going to kind of Dockerize or containerize it using a Docker file and go over what that actually does, and then how to get that on Azure. Hey guys, back in the AC, outside of the heat, and before I show you the code for the actual Twitter bot and how it's been Dockerized, I want to kind of tell you, kind of explain like why Docker and containers themselves are like really popular, and why it's important that I did this vice how I did it, right? So think about how I was hosting my application before. Essentially, it was running on a virtual machine. So I was on pythonanywhere.com, and it was running as basically a always on task, which runs within one of their servers, which is probably located on some virtual machine somewhere. Now, that works fine for my applications, but there are probably some other ones, especially for bigger companies and bigger things, that it wouldn't work for. Where containers comes in is there's just a lot less overhead. So here's where containers become really cool. So how the virtual machine works is you got your base operating system that's on the bare metal machine. Then you got your hypervisor sitting over that. Then you got the operating system of the virtual machine itself. Then you have your runtime, and then right above that is the actual application that you're running. The container itself is actually quite less. It's just the operating system that's on the bare metal machine. Then there's the container manager, in this case Docker. Then the actual runtime, and then the actual application. So we're taking out a whole nother operating system. So we're talking a lot less overhead, a lot less work, and something that can easily go right up into Azure. So let's take a look at how I changed my Python Twitter app and made it available to be a container on Docker and easily moved into Azure's container registry. All right, everybody, so we're over here at my GitHub, and if you go down to the Rocket League Twitter bot, we'll open this up, and you'll kind of see the new README and how everything's been updated. So right here, obviously it's been Dockerized. So I'll read this real quick. The provided Docker file and the Docker compose YML files, they'll enable you to run the script inside of a Docker container. So when you look at over here, the new things you really want to check out are the Docker file, the Docker compose, and the requirements. Now, before I go any further, this is kind of like a newbie's trap that I have to address because this really got me for a while. You'll notice that the config.ini is also a .text, and so is the YML. That will cause a problem, okay? So this happens when you open up this file directly in Notepad. It's going to automatically save it as a text. So this happened to my Docker file initially. It was dockerfile.txt. And if you do that, Docker will not like it, and your program's not going to run. So what you want to make sure you do before you go any further, like the most important note you have to take as somebody jumping into Docker, is to immediately just use the command prompt or PowerShell to make your Docker file. Don't make it in Notepad because it's automatically going to be a .txt like this one. I'm going to have to fix this later. This was just me trying to get this done quickly. But if you'll see here, like this doesn't have that. That's because I made this in the command prompt, and it won't automatically make it a .txt file. So I'm going to go into the Docker file here, and what you can think of or imagine the Docker file is this builds the application within the context of the container. So if you look, this is a Python application, right? So it's going to bring in Python, right? It makes a working directory. Then it copies 3 files. The requirements text file, so that this is what is needed for the program to run. The actual Python app. And then the third one, the last scene ID, which stores all the mention IDs within the Python app. So it's going to copy those all into the container. Then it will install the libraries needed. So right here within the requirements text, that contains all the libraries for Python that are needed with this. And then lastly, it runs the script itself. So in essence, the Docker file is pretty simple. All it is it's a file that runs these commands that you would have to do yourself just within the own file. So instead of you having to do it, it runs in the container. So that one is pretty easy. So let's take a look at the requirements. This is the only library needed for this specific application. So like I said, I built this off of Tweepy. So really this is the only library that's getting added in. And now we're going to jump into kind of see the changes in the main file, right? So the first thing you're going to notice, we're importing config parser. So the whole point for this is to get rid of those keys, those actual keys that existed over here. If you look at my last video, you'll notice I have some keys sitting over here. They weren't out in the open, but they were in this file. Now, by adding an actual config file right here, you can store your keys in a different location and just have them put into this file while it's running. So there's actually some more added security there. So you'll notice if I go real quick to the config file, this is where you can store your keys. Obviously, these aren't my real keys because I don't need you guys messing with them, but you would put a separate file located somewhere else with your consumer key secret and your access key and secret, and then the actual hashtag that you're looking for. So going back to the main file, that's been updated. So the keys are now somewhat more hidden. And then that's really kind of it. The rest is exactly the same code. But what we have now is this Docker file, which will tell the code or tell this program exactly what to bring in and what to run. And right here, I'm going to go real quick to the final piece of the project. Is I essentially used right here to run the Docker container. You can use this to run it within Azure. Pretty straightforward. This is just the Microsoft Docs. You can literally bang run Docker containers and you'll find it. Then lastly, just to make things easier, here's some simple commands within Docker. Just please note, to run something in Docker, you also need to have Docker on your computer, and most likely Docker Compose as well, so you can actually get these commands and run. If you don't have Docker and you try to run Docker run, your computer's just going to say, what are you looking for? So that's kind of the brief overview. I hope I've kind of cleared up some concepts for you guys. If you have any questions or whatnot, comments, there's always room for improvement here, but if there's anything I've learned and can help clear for you guys out, just please let me know. I'll see you all next time.